Hi, I'm Major Joel Ruiz, U.S. Air retired. Joined the Air Force on February the 4th, 1954, and I retired on June the 1st, 1974. I served 20 years and 22 days, and I started out as an enlisted man, became a sergeant, and then I applied for officer training, and I became a navigator in 1960, December 1960. I was assigned to a rescue unit in Tripoli, Libya, and I was there for 18 months. From there, we flew to all over Africa, Far East, Near East, and also back to the United States and Europe. In 1962, I was assigned to a transport plane in McGuire Air Force Base, flying C-118s and the equivalent of a DC-6, four-engine propeller-driven airplane. I was assigned to Vietnam in a rescue outfit, back to rescue in 1965 to Okinawa, Naha, Okinawa. And from Naha, Okinawa, we would fly to temporary duty assignment, Da Nang Air Force Base, on rescue missions over the Gulf of Tonkin and over Vietnam. In 1967, I was transferred back to California, and this time I trained for flying as a navigator on a C-141 four-engine jet aircraft. From there, I again all the way to 1972, and I went back to Vietnam in 1972, flying electronic countermeasures World War II airplane known as a DC-3. And I returned back to the same outfit in San Bernardino, California, at Norton Air Force Base, and I retired from there in June the 1st, 1974. From there, I moved back to my hometown of Laredo, and I had bought some property in San Ignacio, Texas, where I now reside. In 1968, my parents visited me in San Bernardino, California. Sean and Shona, we're affectionately known as that, but their name is Encarnacion Ruiz and Aurelia Lechuga Ruiz. In our family, we were 8 live, and when I was small, we lost a sister, but 8 of us survived, and now we're scattered all over, and we're still, my sister Diana follows me. She lives in South Carolina. Then Geraldina, Diamantina's in New York, Geraldina's in Wisconsin, and Samuel is in California, Francisco Javier is in Laredo, Loretta is in Laredo, and Loretta was able to get her nursing degree. Quitos was also a business, and he became a customs officer. Samuel was, he and Quitos were Marines, and they were in Vietnam at the same time. Quitos, or Francisco Javier, in South Vietnam and with the Marines, and Samuel in DMZ with the Marines. And since I was flying C-141s, cargo planes, to Vietnam twice or 3 times a month from San Bernardino, California, with supplies and cargo, I would call the house, my parents, and check with them, and I'd say, everything's okay. So I go into Vietnam, and I dial the operator. At that time, we had a dial phone that you had to crank, and I would crank it up, get the operator, and I say, contact this outfit in South Vietnam, Marine outfit, and contact this outfit in North Vietnam, northern South Vietnam, by the DMZ, for this Marine outfit. And I talked to both brothers, and at the same time on a conference call, and I tell them that my parents and everything in Laredo was okay. I fly back to California, and from there I call my parents and say, hey, they're still okay. So that was kind of a relief for them to know that Samuel and Francisco Javier were still doing okay in Vietnam. Samuel was wounded by friendly fire in Vietnam, and when he was sent to the hospital in Yokohama, Japan, I was able to visit him and I check him out of the hospital. And we go explore around part of near Tokyo, Japan, while he was still in the hospital. And I would fly back to California. I was able to do that because by now I was a flight examiner navigator, and I would give exams to navigators flying from Northern Air Force Base to Hawaii. I get off the plane and wait for another plane with a navigator that needed an exam, and I get on that plane all the way to Japan. And in Japan, I asked for 5 days leave, for 5 days off. And during those 5 days is when I visit my brother in the hospital. Has been wounded by friendly fire. And then I fly back to San Bernardino, again giving exams to navigators that needed an exam, all the way back to San Bernardino. I was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross, and consequently I was made parade marshal in San Bernardino, California, in the parade, Veterans Parade. And it was a very interesting place or point in our lives, my life, that I was chosen as to be the parade marshal. Okay, we visited the Olympics in Mexico City 1968, and my parents my father has some relatives there in Mexico City, and they got tickets for us to go to the Olympics. While we were there, we'll visit the Archaeological Museum in Mexico City, and also to the pyramids. But the high point of the visit was in the Olympics in Mexico City. You can see at the beginning of the ceremony there were 21 canyon salute, and although you cannot see the canyons, but you can see the smoke where the canyon would go off for the 21 salute of the beginning of the Olympics. The Olympics were held at the Estadio Azteca, and it would hold at around 100,000 people. You can see the balloons, the Olympic balloons going up in the air. The Mexican cadets were the ones that were uh, doing all the marching of the flag and around the stadium. And then we have a girl that would with a torch, the Olympic torch, and she would run into the stadium, up the stairs to where the torch was, the Olympic torch, and then she would light it. Kind of a very nice feeling to see that the United States was very well represented, and also that when they were marching around, the stadium introduction, they received a lot of applause. The crew bus taking us out to the crew taking us out to the airplane on the C-141. Again, my parents were visiting, and I took him to the zoo in California, the San Diego, California, and my father really enjoyed the zoo and the animals in the zoo. In 1967, I was assigned to the unit that flies the president for 3 months in Washington, D.C. And because it was during that time that the Six-Day War started in Israel and Egypt. Consequently, there was very little VIPs flying, and we had rented a house in Georgetown, and we were there, not flying at all. So I'd spent a lot of time at the park near the George Washington University, where they had a swimming pool, tennis courts, and basketball courts. And naturally, I took advantage of all three, and I was able to get my Coast Guard certificate at that time because we had extra time. Once a month, during the 3 months we were there, once a month we had to report to the base for flying safety meetings, and then after that we were free. So I had really a 3-month vacation in Washington, D.C. to explore. I had my brother visit while I was there, and Francisco Javier, and we explored Washington, D.C. I even visited our congressman, Kaysen, at that time, and I complained that the redwoods in California were being cut down and burned. There was 3 of us navigators that rented the house in Georgetown, and I don't remember the exact address, but the streets were paved cobblestone with bricks type of pavement. And like I said, my brother visited at that time, and we had a neighbor or a girl visit from England, and my brother was really taken by her. Her name was Nikki. I did play a lot of tennis while there in Washington, D.C., and that was one of my favorite games that I played. Also going when we were on a mission, I would carry 2 bags. One was my navigational bag, and the other was had maps of the whole world, so we could go anywhere. We were diverted to anywhere in the world with those maps, and that was quite interesting because the ability to be able to go anywhere in the world once we departed our base in San Bernardino, California, Norton Air Force Base. In Vietnam, I was flying a rescue plane. This is 1965 to 1967, an amphibian type of airplane that would land on the water to rescue pilots that had been shot down. They shot out of the sky over Vietnam, and they would fly. They had instructions to fly for the ocean, Gulf of Tonkin, and once they're over the ocean, Gulf of Tonkin, they could punch out, eject from their jets, and then we would pick them up. On my first mission in December 1965, we picked up a pilot that was shot down for about 11 miles, 12 miles from an island near Hai Phong, Vietnam. And while we already got the pilot inside the airplane, we were fired on by the same gun that had shot him down. And this was around 11, 12 miles away from the gun. And the pilot goosed the plane to make sure that the gunner did not have aim on us. And we were able to take off. During the preparation for takeoff, we had JATO bottles, jet assist takeoff bottles, similar to the CO2 little bottles that you see on toys. Anyway, we had two on each side of the plane. And this time while we were setting them up, the fact that we were being fired on, we dropped one of the JATO bottles into the water, and they weighed about 160 pounds each. Anyway, we were able to hook up three of them, and when they take off, the pilot would, at 50 knots, bouncing over the water, he would trigger the JATO bottles, and it would boost us right into the air right away. And flying away from the area, he had to jetson. We jetson the bottles over the Gulf of Tonkin, flying back to Da Nang Air Force Base where we were landed, where we were stationed. While flying over Vietnam, Gulf of Tonkin, waiting for a rescue mission to be called, the pilots, when they got shot down, they would call Mayday, 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 and that alerted us to be prepared to go pick them up from when they bailed out of the ocean over the Gulf of Tonkin. And consequently, while they were waiting for airplanes to go in and out over North Vietnam, we have planes flying alongside of us for protection. And there were the A4 and the A1, and then there was a twin-engine plane with a radar, Navy, mostly radar planes that would fly out of, take off from the carriers. One of the islands we flew over was called Tiger Island, and it was shortly after the DMZ flying into North Vietnam waters over the Gulf of Tonkin, and we call it Tiger Island, but When we first started flying, there was no anti-aircraft guns on it. Later on, they installed anti-aircraft guns and missiles. Flying out of Saigon, because we were flying also on rescue missions over South Vietnam. We went to landed at Saigon from Da Nang, and taking off from Saigon, we climbing up to an altitude of about 8,000 feet. And when we got back to Da Nang, the mechanics, when we parked on the ramp, the mechanics would inspect the engines on the Su-16 amphibian plane. And when they opened the cowling on the one of the engines, a big clunk fell on the pavement, and it was a spell shell, a copper spell shell of a 50 caliber World War II shell, and we had hit it climbing around 4,500 feet, and we ran into it as it was about to go back down, and that was the only time we ever got hit while I was flying the rescue missions in Vietnam. It was kind of exciting to know that we had been hit by a World War II 50 caliber bullet flying out of Saigon. And what they did was take a pipe, the same caliber, same round, probably as a 50 caliber bullet, and they would strike the bullet on a nail on a board, and then fire the bullet. They try to aim the pipe at the airplane, and that's how we got hit. That was very ingenious of them, but it was kind of dangerous too, to fire a bullet like that. On the ramp in Vietnam, you can see World War II planes and all the other planes that were used in Vietnam, mostly A-4s, fighter planes, and these DC-3s or C-47s. Once in a while, you will also see a Connie in there, called Constellation. Tiger Island is a little short north of the DMZ out of Da Nang, and it was quite an interesting place to see, and we knew that we were flying over North Vietnam, territory of North Vietnam. On one of the missions, that the most exciting day of my tour in Vietnam was when, on takeoff, going out on a mission early in the morning. Our missions were lasted between 9 and 11 hours. And one time we fully loaded the fuel tanks on the wings. We had extra drop tanks on the wings. And as we lifted off from the runway, we lost an engine, and it started going pow, 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 and pieces of metal started flying out every which way. I was near with the engine, and I never got hit by a piece of metal. But immediately the pilot jettisoned the fuel tanks, and we were flying, taking off to the north of Da Nang, right over the bay, and we just skimming on top of the water with one engine. And we opened the doors, and we started throwing everything out to lighten the load of the plane. And those JATO bottles weighed about 160 pounds. And the engineer would hand me the JATO bottles, and I weighed about 154 pounds, and the JATO bottles weighed 160 pounds. But I would lift the JATO bottles like nothing and threw them out the window, out the door of the window of the plane over the bay of there at Da Nang, and we circled back and landed in the opposite direction, barely skimming the top of the waves and the water. We also threw we carry a not a life vest, but a lifeboat that weighed for about 8 people, and we also threw it out the door, and that lightened up the load on the plane, and we landed back in the directions. While on our first mission, they issued us a vest, a bulletproof vest. So I said, well, I'm going to see how good this vest is. So I set the vest out about 100 yards, and with an M16 rifle, I would shoot at it. And the bullets went right through it. So I said, this thing is worthless. So when we were flying missions, instead of wearing the vest, I would put it on the seat of my plane so that if we ever got hit, it would at least give me some protection from the bottom of my body. And that was, one of the funny things, but we never got hit except for that time we flew into a bullet. When I was stationed in Tripoli, we would have missions supporting the Mercury project, and Africa was the emergency landing site for the Mercury project rockets taking off from Florida. Consequently, we would deploy from Tripoli, Libya to Kano, Nigeria, and it was about a 9-hour flight from Tripoli to Kano, Nigeria, over the Sahara Desert. We had to cross the Sahara Desert. On one of the missions that we were deployed there, because we go there for about 9 days, and they cancel the mission, we go back to Tripoli, and when they reschedule the Mercury mission, take off again, and we go back to Kano, Nigeria. So on one of those missions, I crossed the Sahara on a dirt road. When a pickup truck or a vehicle travels on the dirt road, it raises up all the dust, and you can see the dust for miles. Well, going across the Sahara Desert, way up in the distance, I see the dust cloud being raised, and I say, oh, what in the world is a vehicle doing out here in the middle of nowhere over the Sahara Desert? But as we got closer and closer, we're only going about 156 miles an hour. But as we got closer and closer, I couldn't see anything. Then we finally got over the area, and there was no pickup truck at all, no vehicle at all, and it was the beginning of a sandstorm over the Sahara Desert. It was quite intriguing to see the beginning of a dust storm into Nigeria, flying into Nigeria. The first point in Nigeria that we hit was called Cinder. They had a radio station there that the airplanes would home in on, and from there we could fly to Kano, Nigeria. I received my wings in December 1960, and I was assigned to a rescue outfit in Tripoli, Libya. At that time, the Air Force Base was Huilas Air Force Base, and while I became trained to fly the Su-16 airplane, after I got qualified, my flight exam was to find the Lady Be Good plane, which was a B-24 that was lost during the Second World War and crash landed in the Sahara Desert near the eastern border of Libya. And consequently, as we took off, a pilot had bailed out over the Mediterranean, and instead of looking for the Lady Be Good, my exam was to look for this pilot. We never found him, and he was lost and never found his body. But that was one of the high points after I had qualified in the Su-16 as a navigator. When I joined the Air Force, I was stationed in Austin, Texas after receiving basic training, and then I went to technical school in Rantoul, Illinois, and then I was assigned to Bergstrom Air Force Base in Austin, Texas. And from there, I got out for 3 months. Before 3 months were over, I rejoined, and I was assigned to the base in Topeka, Kansas. And at that base, I was there till November of 1960, December. I applied for the exam. I had become a sergeant by then, and I applied to take the exam to become an officer and maybe a pilot or navigator. Well, I received my orders to report I had passed the exam in Lincoln, Nebraska, and I received my orders in the Northern Air Force Base in December to report for training in January. So I had a very short period of time to make my decision, and I was going to turn it down, but the NCOIC, a very, very intelligent person, says, no, go ahead and accept it, and in 18 months you can transfer over to become a pilot. Well, I says, okay, I'll do that. So I went in for navigator training instead of pilot training with the idea of later on transferring to become a pilot. Well, while I was already as a navigator in Africa, they changed the rules, and by changing the rules, I became too old to apply for pilot training. So I made my mind to be the best navigator, and I was good at it too, using celestial navigation and very primitive instruments from Second World War for determining the position of the airplane. In navigator training in Harlingen Air Force Base, they would teach us a radar, how to use a radar to determine the position of the airplane, drift, using the drift meters, the sextants to use celestial navigation, and also flying by looking out the window and determine the position of the airplane. And all of this I would use to determine the position of different airplanes. Different airplanes that I flew were C-47, Su-16. The C-47 was a World War II airplane that was used for dropping paratroopers over Normandy on D-Day. And then the Su-16 was a 1947 plane used in the Korean War. And we were still using it in 1960 when I was assigned to that unit in Tripoli, Libya. They also had a rescue plane called a C-54, which was a World War II plane also, but it was 4 engines. And then C-118s, back to Su-16s in Vietnam, and then I trained to fly in a C-141 at near Travis Air Force Base near San Francisco. And while I was assigned to the unit in Washington, D.C., I flew the same thing as a 707, and as a navigator, and I retired at the C-141 cargo plane, 4-engine jet. The countries that I visit, naturally Africa, Cairo, Nigeria. We flew over the lake east of Kano, Nigeria, Lake Chad, and that's where I saw a herd of elephants. And since we were flying at very low speed in the C-54, we had bubbles on the side of the plane for observation. And flying over towards the lake, we saw a herd of elephants, and they were all panicking, running away from the noise of the airplane. But the bull elephant turned around and flapped his wings, challenging the airplane. And I thought that was very unique. Then I saw those that you see in the movies where thousands of white birds fly off the water. Well, we also saw that over there in Lake Chad. And then we flew back to Kano, Nigeria. And that was a high point of that particular training flight. But we go fly around the area, waiting for Project Mercury to take off. And then back to Tripoli, Libya. And from there, we also flew to Sudan, to Southern Rhodesia, and then back to Sudan. And from Tripoli, I would visit Lebanon, Beirut, and I would also go into Germany, France, Germany, and on one trip we had to take an airplane back to San Agustin, Florida for repair, overhaul, and we fly another plane back to Tripoli, Libya. We landed in Bermuda and also England, Scotland. We went on one of the trips to Scotland. A bunch of us rented a car, and we went to Edinburgh to look for the Loch Ness monster on the Loch Ness on the lake there, but we never saw him. The only thing that was interesting about that trip is when we rented the car in England, everybody drives on the left side, and somebody in our crew that assigned to drive the car started to drive right, turned to the left. Well, right away there's another car coming in the opposite direction. So immediately everybody, hey, get on the other side. He had driven it wrong. So we were able to avoid an accident, but that was the high point of that visit to Edinburgh, England, to look for the Loch Ness monster. One of the stories that we heard about Iranian pilots training, at that time Iranian was our ally. Anyway, Iranian pilots were training in the United States, and they went and bought it because they were very wealthy. They went and bought a van, and the salesman told them that cruise control is like an autopilot. So they got on the highway going somewhere, and they turned the cruise control on and left the driver's seat so that the cruise control would autopilot, like an autopilot, fly drive the van. But naturally they went and crashed, and that was a kind of a humorous thing about Iranians thinking about the cruise control was like an autopilot. And that was one of the stories. Continue with the countries that I visit. Iceland, Greenland, and we visit a weather station that belonged to Denmark, in the northwest of Greenland. And I think it's about 90 miles from the North Pole, between 90 and 100 miles from the North Pole. So that's the closest I've ever been to the North Pole. Then naturally, Newfoundland, which is part of Canada, and Japan, Okinawa, Vietnam, Taiwan, Philippines, Guam,
China.
China. In 1973, when President Lincoln restored diplomatic relations with China, we flew, I was on the second plane that flew supplies for the embassy in Beijing, and we fly from Guam Air Force Base all the way to Shanghai, and in Shanghai we picked up a Chinese navigator, and he would navigate the plane from Shanghai to Beijing, the capital of China, and this navigation was using guiding in on radio stations, from one radio station to the next till we got to Beijing. Well, along the way, I would use a radar to determine the position of the airplane and compare it to his plot of the course that we had to fly. And it was pretty close, it was very good. So anyway, he saw how I used the radar to determine the position of the plane. And that was kind of an interesting point. Another thing was, at that time, the Polaroid cameras would take an instantaneous picture. And it was something very new to them. So when we took pictures of them, we would give them the photograph, and they were very impressed. In Beijing, China, I wanted to go see the Great Wall, which is not too far away. But because we were only there one day, the only thing we could visit was a Forbidden City. And that was a very interesting tour, going to the Forbidden City in Beijing, China. And then back to Shanghai and back to Guam. And that was our trip in May of 1973, when President Nixon opened relations with China.